for coming on such a horrible night. And Deb said more fog out there
A
lately
little bit
now,
foggy right now, yeah.
And I said, I don't know, I didn't think this through. But I'll start with my favorite two lines from a favorite poem. And the lines are, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. My kids put this on here for me, okay? So in the last 4 months in America, can you think of two people who should have been paying attention to these two lines, two very famous people? Gisele Bündchen and Tom Brady. You know, what happened to them and what were they? Do you guys know who they are?
The football player.
Football player and his wife. And all along, what was the one word that was in contention?
Football.
Football. She wanted him to quit. He said, no, that is not real love. Something altered in their relationship. And that,
On whose part?
what?
Whose part isn't real love? Her for expecting it and him for denying it.
Yeah. Wait,
I mean, who's at fault?
both of them, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
Can you read those two lines again a little bit slower?
love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. And here, I'll give you a bunch. Oh, you guys were gonna give some back. I'll pass them out. But it's Shakespeare. It's just 400 years ago he wrote it, 400 years. And it starts out, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. But then he says, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. I don't know. I happen to love it. And he wrote it in iambic pentameter. Who dreamed that up and why? It has to be 5 beats to the line, every other syllable stressed. Why you do? I don't know. And then they would do 4 beats to the line or 6. I don't know why. Complicated stuff. So, okay, from that, I'll do some. Oh, Georgia's in here. Our friend Georgia. I told her there would be some raunchy.
That's why I'm here.
Okay. This is E.E. Cummings. Do you guys know his stuff? Did you know he had raunchy stuff?
Yes.
Okay. I got on my computer at home and looked up, I can't think of the word that I used, poetry, obscene, I guess. My computer went black immediately. And I said to my husband and my grandson who lives with us, he's 30, what did I do? They said, nothing, it just happened. And so they cranked it up again. So could you pass those out?
Of course, when the men in the black suits show up to talk,
Yeah.
we're gonna be in trouble, but-
Yeah.
We can share.
Okay, and I'll let you guys share one, and then
Let me bring more I can.
And here are other ones of his. And they're kind of hard to figure out. And in your murder mystery last night, I was reading, and it has nothing to do with the murder. The two characters in it were talking about modern poetry, and they said modern poetry is prose moved around on the page. And that's it. I mean, this is modern poetry like this. You can pass those out too, sorry.
No problem.
oh these okay, I see.
Oh, here's 2 more, Emily.
Thank you.
That one. And, oh, there that. Okay.
Okay.
And I'll just read the first 4 lines of probably his. I carry your heart with me. I carry it never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear. And whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling. The most tattooed phrase in America and the most repeated at weddings. I like it. Is it too sappy for you guys?
What is it?
I carry my heart. I carry your heart with me
In my heart.
in my heart. Yeah.
We can share.
Can't remember how I did, but there's so many.
And then did you get the one where it's just letters that go down the page?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So different critics say about that it's a work of art, not just a poem. A leaf falls to the ground in loneliness. The leaf falling implies death. The cold of the winter is soon to come, and the chill of the fall has rendered the leaf lifeless. The reader should feel emptiness and absence. You guys feel that about the words going down the page? Leaf?
Loneliness.
I figured it out, but
You did figure it out?
yeah, I saw a leaf right away.
Do you feel emptiness and absence?
No, just puzzlement.
Okay. And another critic said the most delicately beautiful literary construct Cummings ever created. And he's a Harvard graduate, just died in 1963. So just wrote that fairly recently, considering that I was born in 1945. And the Buffalo Bill one implies death. I'll have to keep a copy for Georgia about May I Feel.
Actually,
Yes.
I don't think that those two got a Buffalo Bill one. So
Okay.
if you want to read it.
Yeah,
out
if you
loud,
can pass that over then.
You can have my Buffalo Bill, because I have like a pipeline with a person who can give me a copy sometime.
Thank you for doing that.
Okay, and an author, a poet that I really like a lot is Emily Dickinson, and she lived between 1830 and 1886. And at times, at different times they were saying she was a recluse. At different times they were saying she was gay, which irks the heck out of me. I don't care if she was gay at all. But how do you say that when the person saying it is in the 20th century about somebody who lived 160 years ago? You had no proof. So I don't think you had to say stuff like that. But she wrote a thing, I'll pass it out, a narrow fellow in the grass. Hope is the thing with feathers. And I like that she says hope is the thing with feathers. To me, thing is something I would say in 2022. Hand me that thing, no, not thing, that thing over there. It just sounds like a modern word. And she writes about death a lot, the bustle in a house, the morning after death. And then she wrote, I heard a fly buzz when I died. I think just very unusual stuff, considering this was probably 1860. Oh, I was going to say about poems that show up in movies. Have you guys seen Bull Durham about baseball?
Mhm.
In it, Susan Sarandon quotes, I sing the body electric, which then I looked up and read, and I don't get it. It's Walt Whitman, and he writes it after he saw a slave auction, like in late 1800s. Now, I have no idea what that had to do with Bull Durham. And I can't figure out I Sing the Body Electric anyway. And then there's Four Weddings and a Funeral, which is kind of a chick flick, but I love it. Have you seen it? I love it. And a man stands up at a funeral and recites funeral blues
Yes.
by W.H. Auden. I have that in here somewhere. I'll pass that. Oh, here it is. Nice poem. Very nice poem. I wanted to talk about actually the power of poetry. Bobby Kennedy was in Indianapolis in 1968, I think making a speech about his run for the presidency. And right before he spoke to this huge crowd of people, he found out that Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and he was the only one in Indianapolis who knew. And he knew that there were a lot of Black people in the group, and he knew this was going to be very hard for them to accept, very sad. So he stood in front of them and announced that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And as predicted, everyone was so sad and screaming and crying, and he got them to quiet down. And he said, I too have shared great tragedy. My brother was killed by a white man. And then he went on to quote Bobby Kennedy's favorite poet, Aeschylus. I didn't know who that was. It's a Greek man who lived in 455 BC. And his quote was, and even in our sleep, pain which falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. And everybody quieted down, and it was the only large city in America that did not riot that night. This is the one from Four Weddings and a Funeral. Two more poems that show a sad event. And I have read this over and over and didn't realize what it was about. Oh, Captain, my Captain. I didn't realize it was about Abraham Lincoln until I had to read it in
I've heard this
book. Yeah. And he wrote it, Walt Whitman wrote it. He lived between 1819 and 1892. And then the next poem is about a Hiroshima lullaby. And it's about a young girl, Sadako Sasaki, who died from leukemia in 1955 at the age of 12. Very sad poem. And before she died, she tried to fold 1,000 paper cranes like this. My Japanese friend made this like 20 years ago. And she made 965, and then she died. And her childhood classmates completed the magic 1,000 and raised the money for her statue in Hiroshima. And it's the power of poetry and emotion. Okay, these are poems I don't get at all. Do you guys know the Red Wheelbarrow?
Yep.
Like it? I don't get it. Okay, here it is. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. This was on Jeopardy. And I don't want to influence you guys. If you like the Red Wheelbarrow, go for it, right? Other ones I don't get are Alfred Lord Tennyson's stuff. And why don't they say Lord Alfred Tennyson? I don't know. I can't figure out T.S. Eliot's stuff. In 4 different books that my mother had, the Tiger, William Blake, the Tiger, Burning Bright. 4 different books said this is the best poem ever written. You guys know it?
Yeah.
You think it's the best poem you ever read?
Songs of Innocence, one of the best collections of poetry ever.
Is that what you say?
It's from the Songs of Innocence. It's one of the best collection of, Blake was a genius, an artistic genius.
Yeah.
It's a powerful poem. The children like it with the rhyming words and the rhythm of it when you read it out loud to them. It kept my nephews totally entranced when they were young.
It does have a nice rhyme and rhythm to it. Okay, then in another book that my mother had, which was published in 2002, the title of this is The 6th of January. How ironic. And the last 3 lines are, how can this be? Such calm, such peace, such solitude in this world of woe. Okay, these are absolutely goofy poems, just fun to read, fun. Karma Dharma, Pudding and Pie. Fantastic names of jazz. Sweater Weather. And this one I like. This is Jabberwocky. I'm sure everybody has read it. I like it because in it, it quotes the Frumious Bandersnatch. I went to college in Tucson, and the off-campus newspaper was the Frumious Bandersnatch. And every spring, the headlines would be, next week, we will have the celebration of the Vestal Virgins. And then the following week, the celebration was canceled because they couldn't find any Vestal Virgins. It was such a ornery newspaper, fun. And they would stand outside of lecture halls, and like 400 people would be coming out, and they would pass out questionnaires. Can you understand the professor? Is he boring? Do you fall asleep? And then let everybody know what it was all about. These are protest poems.
Yeah.
And the first one is written
For
in
2 months.
870 by a Chinese man. They all protest war. But the unusual one is I Sing of Olaf by E.E. Cummings, who, wrote those really super duper modern, the leaf one with the word leaf going down the thing. And it's just unusual to see what he wrote about I Sing of Olaf, who was a conscientious objector. Yep, all of these are protests and hard to read. Did you say that you think Nick has read Casey at the Bat? Yeah.
Probably.
Okay, I got some of those. And then these are just funny. I want to be famous so I can be humble about being famous. What good is my humility when I'm stuck in this obscurity? These are the protest ones. And these were all just humorous.
This is the front and the bottom part, right? I just want to make sure I pass them out right.
Okay.
Does it matter? Oh. Okay, it's the same one. I see.
Okay.
I see. I thought it was the same poem on two different pieces of paper.
And I love parodies. So somebody wrote one called The Fat White Woman Speaks. Oh, wait a minute. First of all, to a fat lady seen on the train. And then she responds. Not bad.
Sorry. I don't think I did. Richard Berger.
No.
Okay.
Another one from William Carlos Williams. I've eaten the plums that were in the icebox. and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold.
That was the first one we read in high school. I was a part of I joined the poetry club, and that was the first one we ever read, and I can remember it because the cold plums out of the ice box. I'm like, I don't know what an ice box is. And then they're like, that was a refrigerator, basically.
That's not what I thought you were gonna say.
Wait, did I give everybody the same poem? Which one did I?
Thomas Gray.
Thomas Gray.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Sometimes I think you have to read a poem over 10 times before it sinks in. And I have one here, Spring and Fall by Gerard Manley Hopkins. It took me a long time to get it. And then I heard an older man on the television reciting it. And somehow that helped. You guys read it. And then Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. And then Yeats wrote The Lake Isle of Innisfree. And in it, there's a line that maybe he started out by saying, I want to go down into the glade where there are a lot of bees and I can hear them. But what he wrote was, and live alone in the bee-loud glen, bee-loud glen. I love that. And Invictus and a prayer. This is all stuff that I love. Dover Beach was my mother's favorite. And the last two my husband wrote.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll leave you with one more, and I can recite this. So in our family, for Valentine's Day, we always had a cardboard box wrapped in red paper, and everybody in the family was supposed to make a card or buy a card for whoever in the family. And I walked past our 10-year-old son, Billy, who's now 42, and I remind him about this often. He was working and working. And I said, who are you writing this for? And he says, Aunt Edna. We don't have an Aunt Edna. I'm not telling you who it was for. And I said, okay, can I read it? Yes. It was roses are red, violets are blue. Some ladies have mustaches and so do you.
Oh,
no. I know. And I said, Billy, you can't give it to Aunt Edna. And he went into his innocent routine. I said, you can't. And he says, why? And I said, she would be embarrassed. She'd get mad. She would cry. And I can still remember his finger. Yeah, Mom, but.
Oh,
And I said,
no.
I don't care. You're not giving it to her. And that's the power of poetry. But then I took it and gave it to everybody in the family, mailed it off to his oldest sister in college, who said in a cafeteria, everybody read it and got hysterical. See, a poem can lead to anger, embarrassment, or hilarity, depending on the reader. So poems are powerful. I think more powerful than prose. But I like murder mysteries.
So where's the line between poetry and prose?
I like rhyme and rhythm, but so many of the modern ones don't have rhyme and rhythm anymore. I like how they make up words, like E. Cummings made up spring is mud luscious. I like that. I like the Bee Loud Glen that, what's his name, wrote. I don't know. Do you think prose is, I like how you can pack it all into a small line or several lines, and the prose writer has paragraphs and pages and a novel to fill up. But a poetry writer gets a big pack out of a short poem. Are you thinking?
I am.
I saw sparks.
Yeah, it's so unusual. You should watch it because it doesn't happen very often. I guess I'm not a real big rhyming person. You know, I mean, I don't think that poetry actually has to rhyme.
Yeah.
But I think you're right that it does succinctly give you a thought, much more so than prose.
And people seem to memorize poetry more than prose.
I think some of it is in the way the speaker presents the poem. I know like some of the New World poetry, there's a woman, she writes in prose, but when she speaks her poem, she does it and it's like a rhyme, the way she says it. And she'll write a line and she'll stop like halfway through the line and then she goes and starts on. So I don't know. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that, like you said, the poetry is easier when it's a rhyme because it's so much easier to memorize for like kids and things. Like whenever I was coming out of middle school into high school, they were starting to end the children memorizing poems for
Well, that
grades.
was horrible.
Yeah. I can remember doing the night before Christmas. Is it the night before Christmas? It was the night before Christmas. And I was freaking out over that one. Like, I'm not going to remember all these words. I can't memorize anything. I forget everything. But now they don't do it anymore, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's nice. Yeah, I don't have any problems with the whole texting thing, just because, you know, that's the way you communicate. So, and when you think about, like with poetry, how, you know, we talk about symmetry and writing the words and all that stuff. If you go back and you read some of Thomas Jefferson's stuff, he was a phonetic speller. You know, and he, in that period of time, in the late 1700s, there wasn't a lot of rigidity. You wrote what you wrote, and somebody had to parse out what you meant. You know, so I think the rigidity of everything has to A, B, or A, B, or whatever. That seems to me to be much more of a 1900s kind of thing. Maybe 1800s too, I don't know, because I guess Emily Dickinson, wasn't she 1800s, late 1800s?
Yep.
Yeah, so, okay. But I don't know, I'm still puzzled. I don't know. I don't think I've ever, I've written a poem or two. But I don't think I've ever grasped the difference between the two, other than the succinctness of poetry. It is just a quicker way to drive a point home. I can see that. I can feel that.
Emily took stuff to their
To scan.
scanning,
Yeah.
and one of them was haikus, which now I can't remember. My daughter, it's 3 lines. You have to expect
575.
575, and you're supposed to say it all in one breath. But my daughter has one on her T-shirt. It doesn't matter. It's silly. Something, 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 refrigerator is the last part.
I can actually go run and see if I can get that.
Nah,
for
don't worry
you.
about it.
Okay.
Are you sure?
I can't.
have this right there.
Not his funeral.
No, I don't about it in a box.
I forget. Yeah, he did that. Christmas.
How you said your mother loved poetry?
How did I get it?
I mean, I have wanted to read since I was in kindergarten, and I would get books and read. What did you do for poetry? You got books of poetry and read them?
With my mom, you mean? Or
Yeah.
Yeah, well, she had, I think, 25 books in Tucson. And then when I would go visit her, we would look at a lot of her favorite, and she would tell me which was her favorite ones, which were her favorite ones. And then, and when she died, I'm the only child. She said, I get them all. I brought them to Berlin. And every now and then, I just, instead of cleaning, I sit and read her poetry books, you know. And then I never looked at the one called Protest Poems, never looked at it. And I included some that I handed out, you know, super heavy, super sad. It's funny, I bet I've had those for 20 years, never looked at it, never looked at the book. But the first poem I remember her saying to me was at night, winkin', blinkin', and nod. Went out on a,
Winking, blinking, and nod one night. Went
Sailed out.
Silver.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know it as a song.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You couldn't tell that. That was actually singing. I know you probably picked up on that, but that's what was happening.
Yeah.
What about your kids, Nancy?
I would read to them. I would read the children's poems to them. I don't think any of them are as nuts about it as I am.
I just think, like you said, you like poetry. How did you learn to like poetry? Do you read it? I don't understand sitting and reading a book of poetry. I just.
I think it's more powerful when it's read.
Mhm.
It's like Shakespeare. You can read Shakespeare, but you should really watch Shakespeare, or else you don't experience it.
It's like a different way to interpret it, like
Yeah.
through sight or through your mind.
Laura mine is in college.
Okay.
And what gets me is these books that my mother had that critics of poetry wrote, and they said, like Shakespeare's stuff, you can tell that this sonnet was about sexuality. What? I don't think so. And like saying Emily Dickinson was gay.
Well, she had a pretty strong
Relationship.
letter relationship with a man. You know, they only
Yeah.
wrote letters back and forth,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I don't see how they would find that.
Yeah.
But then again,
Well, they said the poem she has about, I went for a walk, I took a dog, and it was on the beach. And they said, this is very strong. That shows her gayness. I didn't get it. And I don't care if she was gay. That's fine. Just,
You're talking about poetry. My first exposure was my father. And my father always remembered poems. He was great at it. And he had this really soft, deep bass voice. Now, if you knew my Uncle Chuck, he had the great baritone voice. My father's voice was lower. And just out of the clear blue, he would, you know, to be or not to be, he knew that entire soliloquy. He did the whole Excelsior poem, that kind of thing. And so I was used to it as a recitation as opposed to a reading. And my father always read to me also, and he told me stories. He was a great storyteller. So, you know, for me, I can hear it, but to read it just doesn't get me. I have to hear it, I guess, because that was my first
Learning of it.
experience with it.
See, I think mine is opposite. If I hear it, I can't understand it. I need to like read it. But I think
ponder it.
that that's because like I didn't, in my family, like my dad wasn't a big reader. My mom was a teacher, so she was more like she was a speaker and everyone listened, whatever. But my teachers at school, it was you get a piece of paper, you read it, and then we discuss it. So I think that's where mine was my English teacher, and she loved Maya Angelou, Where the Caged Bird Sings. And then we would read all these poems, then we would write our own poems. We always did in prose though. There was only like a few times that we actually like did poetry and we rhymed and haikus and things, but a lot of it was like it was a free write, you just wrote whatever.
Free form poem.
Yeah, like I think that there's a big difference in poetry from the 1800s to the poetry now.
Sure.
Like it
Yeah.
was very subtle and like it flowed, like like it was a painting they were making. In today's age, it just feels like it's abrupt. They're right to the point. It's like, it's a different age, but I think that there's so much poetry out there now. Like you can look on the internet and say, I want a poem about cats. You can find the old poem, you can find a new poem, anywhere in between.
Yeah.
But back then, people couldn't do that. So they were just stuck with what was on
Answer,
the page.
what is your favorite?
Pardon me?
What is your favorite poem?
I'd say those of Emily Dickinson's, all of
Do you
those.
have it that you could read it to us?
You've got Emily Dickinson here somewhere. So,
You know, actually, there's these things that connect to things that you could find that poem anywhere and read it from there.
I didn't hear you.
Never mind.
Well, here's one. It's some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings, and instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. And there are lines after words, and the person, after she died, they found all these boxes of her poems under her bed, and some relative found them. And thank heavens didn't say, well, let's burn them all, you know, and kept them and gave them to a publisher. But these lines are where she put them there, and very distinctive of her writing to include these lines. I like the thing about it, I heard a fly buzzed when I died. It's just
Here's a-
very, yeah. Oh, hope is a thing. This was on Jeopardy. Hope is a thing with feathers. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings a tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. It's just hard to believe that this stuff was written in like 1880. I love, she's my favorite.
And you know, it's probably beautiful. I don't know what the hell you said. Truthfully, I don't know. It's beyond me. It's just the poetry is beyond me.
Wasn't
Oh, the snow, the beautiful snow. You know, that's my,
Wasn't Emily Dickinson the one who wasn't taught how to write? She taught herself.
I don't know.
Or it was like the form of writing, like that's why she never used a lot of periods or commas.
Oh,
And they were
E.E.
in-
Cummings never used periods, capitals, punctuation.
He was an early texter then.
Yeah, it must have been. But is that
I don't know
true?
about her.
I think it was her that they said that she wasn't taught she taught herself because she was always all by herself, and that's when she wrote all this poetry, but that she couldn't, like she didn't know where to put commas and periods, so she would just put them at
And
random.
then she put these lines.
Yep,
yeah.
the dashes. I remember learning about that in school.
And they said the last 10 years of her life, she lived alone and rarely went anywhere.
Didn't she write a poem about a window? Well, I mean, they all probably had windows in them, but
I don't
there
know.
was a tree outside the window or something like that. It was, I can't remember. It's been so long. It's been like 4 or 5 years now since I was in high school.
And we were talking about the young woman who recited poetry on Biden's inauguration,
Amanda Gorman.
Amanda Gorman. Pretty good. And then she had a speech impediment and got herself out of it somehow, taught herself how to solve the problem. But before she speaks, she says a mantra in her head to calm herself down, and then recited this poetry that day. Pretty good.
James Earl Jones also had a stuttering problem. The guy with the gorgeous voice, the real deep voice, had a
Darth
stutter.
Vader.
Pardon?
Darth Vader.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Gorgeous voice, yeah. Yeah. I had an interesting experience, it's been a number of years ago, where we were at, I think it was a Christmas madrigal, does that sound right? Is that the proper term? And suddenly someone was reciting Robert Frost Stopping by Woods on Snowy Evening, that one. And I heard this voice. And I'm like, I should know who that is. It was my husband. I had no idea that he knew that. And he knew it in its entirety. It's like, really? Now, we'd been married like a long time. By that time, probably 30 years. Whoa. I
He's
didn't
just full of surprises.
The man is, no doubt.
Do you think it was something like that they taught him in school
Yes.
to memorize and then
Yes.
it just?
Yes, and it was
See-
the one he chose to memorize, yes.
Oh, see, we didn't get a choice of what we could memorize. It was just certain poems we memorized, we recited them.
Mhm.
And I think that's maybe why they didn't stick as much.
Mhm.
Because like I remember I just kept freaking out about 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Because it was such a long one. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna be able to do it. And then you'd have to stand in front of the class and you'd have to do the whole thing and everybody's watching you. And if you stop on one, you just freeze up. And I was like, oh man. But it wasn't so, well, I also didn't have to memorize any when I was in high school. You just read right from the paper. But I remember those middle school days. See, I think that's maybe why my generation has such a problem with like speaking in public and communicating nowadays, because it's like it's falling away. It's so.
Something's coming back to me. Ready? Oh, young Lochinvar came out of the west. And it's so long. But there's the only two lines I remember.
Oh. My father could do "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," but he also had his own version,
Oh,
and I can only remember part of it. "'Twas the night before Christmas, all through the house. Preacher was stirring a little mouse." I mean, it was the same words but with a different twist. I can't remember it all. The preacher was stirring a little mouse. Yeah. But Nick had to memorize "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" last year.
Oh, did he? What school is he go to?
Berlin.
Berlin. Okay.
Yeah.
Who was his teacher?
I don't know.
Is he in middle school?
I would have been ninth grade then.
Maybe it was
Who was the English teacher you were talking about in Berlin?
Jill Schubik. Mrs. Schubik.
Oh, I don't know.
She was a baker. She used to be Miss Baker, and now she's Mrs. Schubik. Do you remember?
Mrs. Nakage?
Yes, and her daughter
And
is
her daughter,
Mrs.
yeah.
Courtney.
Yeah.
Yep, I remember. I didn't. No, Mrs. Naked retired way before. I had Mrs. Courtney. That's where we read Romeo and Juliet, and I was like, oh, Shakespeare, oh. But yeah, we didn't. I don't think we read a lot of poetry in there, but we were just doing like plays and I don't think we had to memorize any like speeches or
Up
anything.
from the meadows, rich with corn, clear in the cool September morn, the crusted spires of Frederick stand, green walled by the hills of Merrill. Round about them, fruit trees, fruited deep. Spare if you must, shoot if you must, this old gray head, but spare your country's flag, she said. Barbara Pritchard. Of course, the whole thing is a wonderful poem, but it's all fiction. It was never true. The whole Barbara Pritchard poem, if anybody's ever done that.
Who's Barbara? I don't know.
Okay, this was, I'm trying to remember who wrote it. Fairly famous poet who wrote it after the Civil War. And it is an actual Civil War poem about the Battle of Frederick, Maryland. Okay, and it is a really rich up from the meadows, rich with corn, clear in the cool September morn, the crusted spires of Frederickstan, green walled by the hills of Maryland.
Listen to you.
Okay, and I can't get all of the stuff that's in between it, but essentially what it was supposedly a rebel commander was going to tear down the flag that she had, the Union flag that she had flying. And people for years thought this was true, and it isn't. It was simply a poet's license, as I say. But and then he does something, and she says, "Shoot if you must, this old gray head, but spare my country's flag, your country's flag," she said. And it goes on from there. But then I remember part of it anyway, and that was one of the ones I was required to remember. I'm
They say
impressed.
sometimes stories are truer than the truth.
Mhm.
Yeah, what the heck?